extra money to do and then hand it over to the rest of the teachers and go, okay guys, this is what we're doing. Am I right or am I wrong?
That's how it works in some staff rooms, but
Others?
with the new system coming along, there's a lot of collaboration like never before, sweeping across the entire state of Queensland.
Okay, collaboration.
Collaboration,
yeah,
is
not sitting by yourself in front of a computer screen driving yourself crazy.
where responsibility is shared. If you end up out in the country, you might feel a little bit alone and like a lone warrior. That's what QCAA is for. If ever you're confused or unsure, if you think that a school might be needing some advice or some assistance, or you ring up QCAA. That's what we're there for. So if it's year 11 and 12, if it's to do with English, then it would be me or one of my colleagues. If it's from year 7 to year 10, it's another lady, Robin Whiting, who looks after that area. Okay. So there's always there's the authority that you can go to. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's start. I chose this photo because I think it's exactly where you're at. You're delving into the minutiae of the standards elaborations and the Australian curriculum. You're looking at the intricate bits and pieces, how it all fits in together and works. That's us actually having locked ourselves out of our car and trying to get the lock to unhook so you get back into it. And that's what you're doing. You're trying to unlock the key to the principles of assessment, which is what this entire unit is about. And you can't do that without looking at the detail. Anyone who doesn't look at detail when they're crafting assessment or marking a student response is in for a lot of trouble. Your reliability in your marking could potentially be quite problematic if you're not looking at the detail in the student response and in the standards elaborations, because that's where you go to cue you into what you're actually looking for, what it is students are expected to demonstrate. So really it's all in the detail. If you don't focus on getting the detail right in your task, by using the right cognitions, the right language, making sure it's accessible, which is the equity principle, and making sure that it's valid, you can't make, you're going to have serious issues in terms of students perhaps not being able to do what they're meant to do because they haven't been properly asked, because they don't know exactly what they're supposed to do. It might be ambiguous. You can't even say your task is valid, which is one of our principles, if you haven't gone to the Australian curriculum and those QCAA standards elaborations and understand how they all fit together. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's complicated. There are lots of pieces to the jigsaw, and it takes a while for it all to come in, to click into place, but it will, I promise you, it absolutely will. And when it does, it's sweet, it's that sweet spot. So minutiae and attention to detail, even with basic things like spelling, grammar and punctuation are really important in a task, because we need to model what we're asking students to do. And misplaced commas can cause confusion, as can capital letters. So again, it's detail, 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 absolutely all the way. And that's why it takes time to construct quality assessment. And it takes time to ensure that you're following those three principles. It takes time to become familiar with those standards elaborations, but as I keep saying, they drive everything we do. So, learning intentions for today. We're going to have a look at how to actually analyse ads.
Oh, yay!
Because that's a really fun part of the English classroom. And you need to produce a standard A response, which means you need to understand what the qualifier of discerning means. Okay. Just for a few seconds of recall, someone define a cognition, someone define a qualifier. Both appear in the standards elaborations. Which one is which? What is what?
Analyze is a cognition.
Analyze is a cognition.
Discerning is a qualifier.
Discerning is a qualifier. C.
Evaluate is a cognition.
Yes.
Effective is a qualifier.
Which would be standard?
B.
Yes. And what is discerning? Which standard? A. See, you've come a long way. Some teachers out there still aren't 100% sure what a cognition or qualifier is. Their learning has skyrocketed with the new system coming in, and schools are getting very focused on these things. So we need to know what discerning looks like to get that standard A. We're going to discuss validity, equity and reliability. That's the foundation of pretty much everything we do as teachers, but it's primary focus for this particular assessment. In fact, it should govern everything we do as professionals. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the rationale and how the validity links into that. And all that is based on those suggestions you gave me at the end of last week's tutorial. So it's about being responsive to your needs and giving you what you're asking as well. So, as always, I start off with this because it's a cue, it's priming us. We all know this document extremely well by now. I'm sure we've all pored over it, frustrated, you know. Been tempted to tear our hair out, but it does put us in the mindset of where we're going to go. And we're going to have a look at some of these questions today and break them down a little bit. Consequential validity, for example, and content validity. I have talked about them throughout, but this is our chance to really drill down into them. And of course, the all-important rubric, which you're labouring over at the moment for your task. Make sure you have read it very closely. So, your request was to return to these 3 principles, and this is a slide that you're probably quite familiar with, or maybe haven't looked at it for some time. But validity is looking for authentic learning opportunities, and the Australian curriculum talks about authentic. You might be thinking, well, what does authentic mean? So you can just Google it. Define authentic. Can someone do that for me, please, and then tell the group? Authentic learning opportunities that connect to the students' experiences and align with the curriculum. So if you're teaching something, if students are learning it, chances are they're going to be assessed on it, and that's why learning experience should be authentic, because there's always got to be a clear alignment between the teaching, learning and assessment. Golden rule. Tattoo it into your thinking. Teach students the skills and knowledge they need to succeed with multiple modes of representation. So multiple modes of representation is just breadth of curriculum, but teaching students the skills. So, an example would be, in terms of validity, you have to go to the Australian curriculum. The Australian curriculum tells you what the achievement standards are. Remember, receptive and productive. In those achievement standards, you're told what cognitions they are. Is it analyse, evaluate or explain? They're different for Year 8, Year 9 and Year 10. And then out of those achievement standards, the standards elaborations from QCAA have fallen out of. So you'll see clear alignment. The standards elaborations must link to those achievement standards. That's how you get validity. If you're writing a task for a Year 10 student and you haven't got to evaluate anywhere on that task sheet, it's not valid. It's rubbish. It's not doing what it's meant to be doing. As I said earlier, students will not do, or most likely will not do if you're not explicitly asking them to. Why would they? So if you want them to evaluate, you need to specify evaluate. If you want them to describe, you specify describe. So validity is tied up in the curriculum. So they're your governing bodies, the Australian curriculum and QCAA. You cannot do it without, and that's what you're talking about in your rationale. You're talking about how your task is valid. You're going to talk about construct validity, content validity, and consequential validity. You're going to tell me that the Australian curriculum requires students in Year 9 to do this, this, and this. And your task asks students to do that. You're going to tell me that the standards elaborations provided by QCAA require students to do this, this, and this. That's why you've constructed your standards elaborations, your rubric, in the way that you have, so that there's a clear relationship between what QCAA has provided and what you're actually doing. You're going to talk about how you have contextualised your standards elaborations, because that makes it meaningful. That reflects best practice. So you'll take those standards elaborations, and we've talked about this in depth. Take the general language out of it, which doesn't mean anything. In other words, genres, you remove that word, and you put blog. Out there in the school world, if it's a report, you put report. The actual text that students are analysing, if it's ads, if it's 2 ads, you say 2 ads. That's how the students make sense of it. You don't leave it as texts that's meaningless. It doesn't help students understand what it is they're trying to do. So you are explaining your choices in terms of the validity. You might, as we have also discussed, break those standards elaborations up a little bit. So you'll use the guts of it, you'll contextualise it, but you'll have bullet points underneath to clearly specify what it is teachers are looking for in that particular standard elaboration. Why do we do that, by the way? You don't have to do it, but what is a good reason for doing it? We've talked about this, but just try and think back.
So that so other teachers that are marking are all on a similar page, so they're all marking specifically the same sorts of things, and that the overall result will be like equally moderated over time.
Yeah. So you can have, let's just pluck some words out of the sky. Student shows discerning use of grammatical structures. And you can leave it at that if that's what the standards elaborations say. But what do the 5 teachers or 8 teachers in your teaching team think are grammatical structures? If you say, you keep that, and then you say grammatical structures includes compound sentences, compound, complex sentences, complex sentences, phrases and clauses, cohesion, then you're going to get teachers all looking for the same things, because we get tired as teachers. And if you want reliability, there's one of our principles. The clearer those standards elaborations are, the more consistent your marking across groups of teachers or individual teachers is going to be. So you'll get into reliability, into marker reliability. It's also beneficial to students. If you don't have compound, complex, compound sentences in your rubric, that's okay, but you need to make sure students know what that actual standard elaboration means. Because when that is itemised, teachers are thinking when they mark it, okay, are there compound sentences? Okay, are there compound, complex sentences? And are there complex sentences? And if the student's written only in simple sentences and no compound sentences, and now compound, complex sentences, then that's going to help them determine an overall standard, because they're not showing range of of grammatical structures. Okay, so that's the advantage of breaking it down. Increased reliability in marking. You want everyone to get close to the same standard, and students know exactly what you're talking about, what they're looking for, so they can say, well, okay, I've got 40 simple sentences. I've only got 5 compound sentences and I've got 4 complex sentences. I need to actually reduce my simple sentences, or the number of those, by making some compound sentences. Okay, so same thing with language features. Are you going to itemise, if it's persuasive speech, you could have rhetorical devices like the tricolon, rhetorical questions, emotive language. Obviously you don't want your criteria sheet to be like 5 pages, so it's common sense as well. So that's validity. Based on the curriculum, based on your standards elaborations and the rubric you have created, based on your task statement, and everything else you put in that template. You can say your task statement is valid because it includes the cognitions required by the standards elaborations, which is analyse or evaluate or identify. You might explain your reasoning. You might state why you have put analyse and evaluate in that place, and sequence and organise further down. Explain your thinking, explain your reasoning. And as I said last week, it's a really good idea when you look at the standards elaborations to have a look at what is considered to be the primary cognition, if there is one. In other words, analyse or evaluate according to your year level. If it's year 8, it's explain. And make sure that's in the primary part of the task. You'll find lots of other cognitions in the standards elaborations, like sequence, maybe organise, there might be structure, there might be manipulate, there might be Words like positioning the audience. Make sure that you've chosen carefully those parts that you want students to do. For example, if the standards elaborations require students to talk about how language features are positioning audiences, then you need to have that in your task statement. Because that's different. Analysing is, which we're going to have a look at, is breaking things apart. But you can still analyse and not talk about how that's going to position readers. So you can break something apart. I can say the text had complex characters that were cool. Terrible, but anyway. Or you can say the movie or the book had complex characters that were cool, which positioned audiences to value bravery, kindness and decency because these characters validated these qualities and were successful in whatever they did. That's a really shocking example. But the last bit is important because you need to use the words positioning audiences to feel a particular way, and we're going to look at that as well, how you actually do that. So that's all linked into validity. Reliability, I think I've said at least 5 or 6 times, maybe more already. Clear learning intentions, flexibility in ways that success criteria can be represented, multiple modes of presentation. So reliability is directly related to marking because your learning intentions have to be very clear. And if you think of your learning intentions as the standards elaborations, because they are learning intentions, aren't they? They're actually the standards on which students are being assessed, but they're also the goals. If the standards elaboration says analyse language features, then that's a learning intention as well. You need to teach them how to analyse language features. So they act in a dual capacity. Equity, to find out what students need to help them achieve, you need to get to know your students. We're talking about assessment specifically here. But as we have talked about in the past, think about the accessibility of your language. For something to be equitable, everyone must be able to understand it. That's a simple premise. So in our classroom, we've got some Year 8 level proficiency students, some Year 10 level proficiency students. So the Year 10 level students aren't going to have any problems understanding your task, assuming it's written properly, but can they still be successful? The Year 8 level proficiency students may have trouble understanding your task sheet if you're using jargon and unnecessary sophisticated language. You don't dumb things down. As I said before, you don't change discerning, you don't change effective, you don't change the cognitions of analyse and evaluate. The Australian curriculum has said they're the standards, achievement standards, learning intentions. So, validity, reliability and equity. So always be mindful of how teaching practices must be inclusive, and that goes along with everything we do. So if you've got a range of cultures in your classroom, you don't use Aussie jargon or Aussie slang in your task sheet because you're actually discriminating against them, because the chances of them being able to understand that language may be minimal. It may not be, but it might be minimal. So any word that you have used that you think might have other connotations or meaning within it, you need to replace with something else. And that's actually doable if you're talking about ads. We naturally use language we're familiar with, so just check your wording and make sure that they're not culturally laden so that someone else is excluded. My son's a carpenter. Look, he's learning his trade. He comes home and he starts talking about tools. I have no idea what he's talking about. I'm highly educated. And he's excluding me in his language, just in his choice of vocabulary. My daughter doesn't because she's a doctor. Doesn't matter where you go and what you do, there's specific language that excludes some people from participating and language that includes. So you just really need to be very mindful of that. So what does discerning look like? This is a scaffolding sheet that I used to give to students. You have seen the student response killing a whale, so hopefully that's popping into mind. But this is a scaffold, it's a table that I give students to fill in because they need to understand the way it positions audiences. This is the number one thing that can be forgotten in students' responses in the English classroom. So, lines, it's poetry in this case, but you're talking about ads. And remember how I said I won't always give you direct instructional teaching on the thing that you have to do. I'll give it to you, I'll provide something similar and then you transfer the same principles across because that's where your learning really deepens. So, your students will be analysing poetry, absolutely guaranteed. In fact, they might be exposed to poetic language in a narrative or a novel or an ad. There is poetic language all around us, in music and lyrics. So, you give them lines from the poem in one, and they just go through and they choose something that strikes them. There's no judgment about what they choose, they can choose what they want. This is how I scaffold. You can do it your own way, this is just one way. But it's something to keep in mind when you're constructing your standard A response. So what parts of the ad are you looking at? What are the words? What are the colours? What's the camera shot? Where is the object? Is it in the centre? Is it off centre? Is it, how is the object positioned? We're going to look at that too. Then you identify it. So if it's a really close camera view of someone's eyes in an ad, you would say close-up. You would call it a close-up. In this case, while the hooks fly open, it's a metaphor. Because these are the hooks in the horrible device that latches onto the whales and kills them. And they're flying. Well, hooks don't fly. That's where the metaphor comes in. So I'll let you read this. So this is answering this. How does it create meaning? That is, how does it link to the theme or message of the poem? That's your thesis when you're talking about your two ads. You're looking at your two ads, they're separate texts. You have to somehow bind that together in a cohesive whole, and you do that by creating a thesis statement. That's why this is there. So it's good to refer to this being a metaphor and its meaning, but this is linked into the message of the poem. Let's say the thesis is the whale condemns whaling as brutal. This is a direct link back to that thesis. You don't do it every single time you analyse a language feature because you blow your word count. So you use it discerningly, like everything you do in the English classroom. But there's a point. There's a point to breaking that language feature down. You're always coming back to your argument of your thesis. What mood does it create? What is the poem doing? In this particular poem, there's sorrow and rage and anger at the cruelty of killing whales the way it's done. So it's developing this mood, a sense of doom for the whale's safety. So what are those ads doing? Is there a mood? Maybe there's not a mood, but maybe there is, and if there is, you can actually talk about it. Maybe there's a sense of that product that's being advertised saving some aspect of your life, your soul. You know how these ads use hyperbole. That's actually one of these ads have hyperbole riddled throughout. Look for it, see if it's there. What is its effect on readers? And this is the one I was telling you about. The effect on readers, or you could say position. This ad positions audiences to value masculinity as an admirable trait for a male because of the muscles, because of the physical prowess, the beauty in the man. All the while, the ad's advertising deodorant. So the underlying message is that this is the ideal male. If you wear this deodorant, you're going to feel like this man, maybe even look like this man. So it's an appeal to athleticism or virility or prowess, but it's definitely positioning the audience. So try and work out how the audience is being positioned. So this is an example. The effect on readers is one of loathing for the users of the books and anguish for the innocent whales. So this is actually a double-pronged statement. It's talking about the effect on the readers in terms of loathing the killers, and it's also the poetry readers who are experiencing anguish. For the innocent whales being cruelly slaughtered as the hooks fly open, gouging into the great grey backs of the gentle beasts. And there's actually, I'm using language here to manipulate you there because I'm using words like cruelly, slaughtered. So I'm actually positioning you there to accept my point of view as well. And that's what you're doing also in your analysis. You're positioning me to accept your thesis statement that those ads are representing women as moronic fools, whatever it might be. I used a very aggressive verb like gouging. I didn't have to use that verb, I could have used something else. Into the great, so I'm complimenting the whales, grey backs of the gentle beasts. I'm giving them human characteristics, gentle beasts, which are doing nothing more than swimming harmlessly through the ocean. I've even thrown an adverb here of harmlessly. Compassion and fear are also aroused, so that's audience positioning, as concern for the whale's well-being escalates. So you can see here that if you give a scaffold like this to students, they're being forced to break the language down into tiny little chunks and then making meaning out of it. It makes it much easier for students to come up with something intelligent and articulate if you give them some examples. So that's the first example. The second one is the whales breach the sliding seas and you squint. So that's sibilance, that's that poetic device. It's just a range of S sounds which denotes movement or sense of eeriness. In this case it's movement, but I think it is also a little bit of eeriness. How does it create meaning? It emphasises and mimics movement, in particular the parting of the sea to make way for the majestic breaching whale. What mood? It evokes awe for the might of the whale breaking apart the vast ocean, but it also creates a sinister mood through the repetitive S sound, forewarning of violence to come. So you can see that the poet's setting up the slaughter. It's giving us this image of this amazing creature, and it's going to be dead in a moment. And it's really emphasising that. You can see that specific reference to the repetitive S sound is showing a very deep knowledge and understanding of what sibilance is, and it's extending that further by saying forewarning of the violence to come, because we know the whale dies. What is its effect on readers? Awakens and strengthens readers' awareness of the impending threat against the whale with a spiralling tension as the poem continuously describes the helplessness of the whale against the merciless, unconquerable machine that inevitably leads to the destruction of a living being for oil. That might be a little bit overwritten, but that is for students. It's to really emphasise to them how they can make connections between this, breaches the sliding seas, you squint, which may not mean much to them until they've gone through these steps of breaking it down, and they suddenly come to this. All students, D level standard, C level, can do this if you work it through with them. So you'll be thinking about your ads in this case. Whatever you choose in your ad that you're going to talk about and analyse, or ads I should say, you're aiming to be able to do this. You've only got, I think, 800 words. So again, that requires discipline and discernment in your choice.
Yeah.
You're going to, when you look at your ad, you're going to choose the things that jump out at you and give you the most to say. You're not going to perhaps talk about some tiny little thing over there in the corner which doesn't seem so significant. It might be, but it might not be. And I'm not going to look at your analysis and say, oh, the student didn't talk about that thing in that ad. I'm going to look at what you have done. It's not a deficit approach. It's not what you haven't done. It's always what you have done. So that's actually a way of scaffolding and breaking it down. Now, let's practice. So I'm going to give you, have a look at that. I'm going to give you some paper copies. Perfume ads are really interesting, and watch ads are really interesting.
Oh, colour.
Wow, what colour. I'm giving you this to keep, just to remind you, or to just model, you know, how you can actually do it. So if we're looking at, let's have a look at this together as a group. Let's break it down. You've got that in front of you now. What do we notice? What are the things they're going to actually talk about in this particular ad? Actually, have a look at that, right? And then have a look at this one. And then have a look at that one. And I'll get you to choose. That one. Powerful messages being portrayed here. And then there's this one. See how much word and how much wording is evident there? Very different to some of the others. You see a lot of blue, you see a lot of colour blue with glint. Why they're choosing blue, it's deliberate. So I would say that every single thing on every single ad is scrutinised intently. It's there for a reason. Nothing on that ad is there by chance. It's all about manipulating the audience to think a certain way and to value a certain quality about being a human being. It could be appealing to their fear, insecurities, desire to be wealthy, successful, all those things. Maybe it's a desire to be popular. So, do we have a preference for the ad we'd like to deconstruct together? Shall I do this one for you, and then we'll do one together?
Okay.
So, not a lot of wording on there, and you think, oh geez, what can I do with that? But it's loaded. James Bond's choice. Who's James Bond? Heroic. Womanizer. Very successful. Not just a womanizer, but successful. He's rugged. He's handsome.